يا رب العباد
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Welcome everyone to this important webinar on the topic of supporting students with ADHD in the classroom. My name is Anisa Khan Ali. I'm the Vice Principal of the elementary campus at Safan Marwa Islamic School, and I will be your moderator for this evening, inshallah. This webinar is hosted by the Islamic Schools Association of Canada and organized in collaboration with a remarkable group of partner organizations, Ruh Care, Smile Canada, Nasheeha Mental Health, and Muhsen. Allow me to start by briefly introducing the Islamic Schools Association of Canada and the work that we do. ISAC aspires to promote, advance, and develop Islamic schools across Canada by grounding our efforts in current and emerging research on Islamic education. Our vision is centered on fostering God-centered education inspired by an Islamic worldview. We share the mission of Islamic schools across the country to help nurture the next generation of Muslim students as model Canadian citizens, contributing meaningfully to both our country and the global Ummah. With a team of educational experts, ISAC has been dedicated to building networks between Islamic schools and organizations across Canada. We share resources, offer educational conferences, retreats, and professional development workshops, and create guides designed to strengthen Islamic pedagogy and teaching practices rooted in faith. Additionally, ISAC supports Islamic school communities across Canada in offering webinars like these, honing in on topics of critical importance. Tonight, we are honored to partner with incredible organizations, as mentioned before, including Ruh Care, Smile Canada, Nasheeha Mental Health, and Muhsen, to address the topic of supporting students with ADHD in the classroom. To understand more about our partners, we are pleased to have with us a representative from some of the organizations that will give us a short overview of the work they do. I would like to first call on Sister Ruan Muzammil from Smile Canada. Sister, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Rawan. So I'm the Education Outreach Coordinator at Smile Canada Support Services. Smile essentially supports currently over 1,000 families throughout Canada, and we support racialized youth and children with disabilities, and that can be physical, learning, developmental, intellectual disabilities. We even deal with critical illnesses as well. So we offer a wide range of programs and services. Once a family originally gets signed up with Smile, you get assigned a service navigator, which they're essentially your caseworkers, and they speak different languages so they can accommodate a lot of our families, since a lot of them are refugees and newcomers. And then they connect with them, do wellness calls, and essentially give them a brief overview of the different programs and services that we offer to best accommodate the family and see where we can support them. Those programs and services include family services. So we have an accessibility fund, which is essentially financial support that can help pay for adaptive equipment and therapy. We have a hospital support group, parent coaching and support groups, wellness program, and then we also do IEP program support as well for schools. And then on the education side of things, we also offer workshops and presentations and trainings for educators, community organizations, healthcare professionals, just to teach them culturally responsive practices and how to best support youth with disabilities. And the one thing I really wanted to mention is a lot of the time when people think about Smile Canada, they just think about specific types of disabilities or critical illnesses, but they don't realize that neurodevelopmental disabilities, so like having ADHD, is one of the things that we do offer support in. So we create lesson plans for teachers that are designed to accommodate and support any kind of student, regardless of their disability, with alternative options on how to go about teaching certain lessons or having activities. We offer reading kits that are designed to teach students and educators more on disabilities like ADHD. And within those reading kits, there's also sensory items, and we offer also sensory items as well, just to help stimulate students. So as a community, please make use out of the resources and services that we offer at Smile, and don't assume that maybe ADHD is something that can be overlooked and we won't be able to support, because it is one of the areas that we do support a lot of students and just youth in general. So if you would like to register with Smile, you can check out our website to register as a family, and we can start supporting your child or youth or one of your students. Yeah, Jazakallah.
Thank you very much, Sister Juan. I would like to now call on Sister Aisha from Ruh Care to share an overview on the work that they do. Sister?
Sounds good, inshallah. Bismillah, Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. It is a pleasure to be here today, alhamdulillah, and may Allah reward everyone that has put in the effort to make this possible. We're trying our best to support our community with one thing at a time, one resource at a time, however that may look. But alhamdulillah, it's truly a pleasure to be here. I am the program manager at Ruh, and Ruh is an online therapy platform. We provide therapy to the Muslim community, not limited to just the Muslim community, but all of our therapists, alhamdulillah, are Muslim and non-compromising on their Islamic values. We really, really make sure that the Muslim therapists that we have on our team are not just licensed professionals, but are also incredibly steadfast with their Islam, alhamdulillah, such that they're able to serve the community in a way where it's holistic. Part of our faith is to truly, truly take care of ourselves. And sometimes we take that from a more physical, more tangible sense, where our body is an amana, but truly our ruh is also an amana. And we need to put in the effort, and it's really our responsibility to have a better understanding of who we are, develop that self-awareness, seek out the right tools to help empower us to have a better relationship, not just with the people around us, but with ourselves, such that our relationship with the world around us also improves, alhamdulillah. And to make this more possible, alhamdulillah, as a team, we have about 28 therapists on the team right now, across multiple different specialties, as well as 16 languages, which is incredibly impressive. I'm so proud of the team for everything that they're able to do and serve. But these languages are really to break down the different accessibility barriers. Aside from being non-compromising on our Islamic values, we also aim to be very culturally responsive. Sometimes through therapy, you have to address certain cultural nuances that not everyone can understand about yourself or your potentially even family hierarchy, your outlook on the world. And that truly is necessary in being able to guide the person and empower the person to make better decisions, right? And alhamdulillah, due to our very diverse team of therapists, we're able to serve the Muslim community in a way, inshallah, that is truly honoring them. And today, from our team, alhamdulillah, we have Sister Randa. She is our occupational therapist, and I will allow Sister Anisa to formally introduce her, but thank you so much. Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Sister Aisha. I would now like to, I'm not sure if we have a speaker from Nasheeha Mental Health, one of our sponsors as well for this evening's event. However, if I can probably say a few words on an overview on the work that they do at Nasheeha. Nasheeha provides our community as well with the tools they need to address mental health. With our confidential helpline, the youth receives immediate, anonymous, and confidential support over the phone 24/7. Their educational programs raise awareness within the community, the stigma around mental health. The services are open to everyone, regardless of age, gender, or background. They are committed to providing a safe and non-judgmental environment where individuals can discuss their concerns without fear or of stigma or discrimination. Before I introduce our main speaker, who will also tell us a little bit about Ruh Care, I would like to also acknowledge our other partner for this webinar, Muhsen, who couldn't be here this evening. Muhsen is an American nonprofit organization founded by Dr. Omar Suleiman, serving families and individuals with intellectual, mental, and physical disabilities. Muhsen works to establish inclusive and accessible Muslim communities for individuals with disabilities and their families across the US and Canada. This is done through engaging in community advocacy and education awareness, implementing and encouraging programs and services, and ultimately leading to inclusive and welcoming communities or acceptance, inshallah. So I will now provide an introduction to our webinar this evening, as well as introduce our main speaker. Tonight's webinar will run from 6 o'clock to 7:30 p.m., inshallah, and feature a presentation from Sister Runda Ibid about the topic of ADHD from an Islamic perspective. We will understand some background about students with ADHD and moreover, learn how to best support them in the classroom and at home. We would like to thank all of the participants for being here this evening and for providing your questions or areas of focus on the registration form. Our panelists has looked at these areas and will try their best to address them. However, throughout the webinar, please do use the Zoom Q&A or chat to populate any questions that come, as there will be some time at the end to address these shortly. Now I'm honored to introduce our panelists for this evening. Sister Runda Ibid is a mother of 2 children and a pediatric occupational therapist with Ruh Care. Runda currently works with children with various needs, sensory, emotional, academic development, and physical, both in the school setting and within their homes. Runda works primarily with children who present with emotional regulation needs, behavioral needs, sensory processing, attention, executive functioning, and fine motor needs. Runda uses a collaborative approach wherein she involves the child, their caregivers, and teachers in supporting the child in their various environments and with their needs. Runda uses components of play therapy in her practice, as well as various social emotional learning techniques to support her clients. Runda assesses children's fine motor and handwriting needs and devises programming to help improve their skills in an engaging and effective manner. Sister Runda, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair, Anisa. It's an honor to be here today, and I'm just so impressed by all the organizations that are partnering for today, and just an absolute admiration of what ISAC has been able to do, the Islamic School Association of Canada, to bring in Islamic schools from all across the country where we can share ideas and innovation and skills and all these things that can help us better support the children that are entrusted to our care. So I'm very, very honored to be here today. And I want to start by saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa salatu wa salamu ala ashraf al-mursaleen. I know we have a mix today of parents and teachers and administrative staff as well. So I'll be trying to capture the experiences of all these individuals in their care and in their working with children with ADHD. Just as a little heads up, I did come down with a cold today, subhanAllah. I dodged it when it ran through my entire household, and then it, subhanAllah, hit me today. So forgive me for my raspy, congested, nasally voice. Inshallah, we will get through this. I'll be sipping on some water throughout, and I encourage you to do the same. Grab something you like to drink, and we'll get started, inshallah. So if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, I always like to start any talk I do with just taking a moment to, first of all, renew our intentions and why we're here. SubhanAllah, the pursuit of knowledge or seeking knowledge in order to be able to benefit ourselves and others is such a commendable act in our faith, alhamdulillah. And I always just like to take a moment to breathe, center ourselves, and kind of remember why we're here and why we're doing the work that we're doing, inshallah. So my objectives for today and what I'm hoping that we can all walk away with is to discuss how ADHD can present in children, what it truly is, how it can manifest in children in different ways. No two children with ADHD will have the same experience. It can be very, very different from child to child. Common challenges that children with ADHD experience and how it presents in the classroom and at home. Again, they can present very differently in both of those environments. Like the same child will be one thing at school and something different at home. I'll be talking about some considerations for teachers. A big part of my work is working with children and their teachers at schools. And alhamdulillah, I've had the privilege of going to many schools and engaging with amazing, amazing educators, alhamdulillah. So I love being around teachers, and I'm so glad that there's a good number of teachers here today. I'll also be talking about considerations for parents. As a mother, I know how difficult it can be to support your child when they're experiencing any kind of struggle or challenge. And we are usually working through our own struggles as parents as well. So that just magnifies how difficult it can be. So I'll be getting into that too, inshallah. And then I always like to present in my talks a framework. So I'll be giving specific strategies for sure, inshallah, practical things that we can all walk away with. But I always make sure I present a framework or an approach because you might not always remember the specific strategies I give. But if we walk away with this new lens, this new understanding of things, you'll be able to come up with your own strategies in the moment. That might be a lot more suitable and catered much more specifically and uniquely to the children that you're working with. So I'll be getting into some framework ideas, specific strategies, and all that's in between, inshallah. And with any talk, I always, again, like to go back to our source, right? Go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how recentering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the work that we do. And the way I look at it is these children that we've been given the privilege and the blessing of being involved in their life, and that they're entrusted to our care, they're an amana, they're a trust to us. And when we take the time to work on understanding them, really trying to understand where they're coming from and why they do the things they do, and we learn about their struggles and their needs, and we try to provide them with the support they need on their learning journey, subhanallah, like that's something that inshallah we will be rewarded for, right? That we are taking the time to really understand these children, versus sometimes we might jump to a conclusion or a label that isn't always helpful when we're working with children who have various needs. SubhanAllah, I always think that this is how they were created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the all-wise, the all-knowing, the most compassionate, the most merciful. He created them with these needs. And our role is to be supportive to them, and that we were subhanAllah put in their path on their journey of life to provide that support for them, inshallah. And I always think about how blessed we are to have access to so much knowledge now, alhamdulillah, that there's no shortage of knowledgeable people and courses and books and frameworks that can really help us understand these children. And I always just feel incredibly grateful that we have access to these things, alhamdulillah. And lastly, the more I learn about the Prophet ﷺ, the more I realize how he perfected this ability to cater his communication and his approach to people based on where they were at, based on their level, their developmental level, where they were in life, and how he spoke to children. It's really, really beautiful when we learn these things and we see that although he was carrying such a significant weight, I mean, I can't think of anyone else that had the same type of weight that he was carrying in terms of the ummah and spreading this message. Yeah, he still took the time to be compassionate and be merciful. And the way his approach was with people and how he even corrected their mistakes is so, so beautiful to learn. And I always draw on that. Whenever I'm in a situation, I'm like, I wonder how the Prophet ﷺ would have handled this with utmost mercy and compassion. And it doesn't mean that we don't correct behavior. It means we do it in a way where we understand that this person's been entrusted to us, that I need to do it in a way where I don't repel this person, I don't make them feel worse about themselves. I do it in a way that embodies this concept of compassion that we're supposed to have for each other. So I always like to also start with a reflection. So I think reflection is really important as an educator, as a parent, as anybody really, that we take the time to just sit and think for a bit and reevaluate and reassess and just take a moment to really reflect on how we go about things, how we show up in the world. So I like this reflection because I do it as myself, as a mother and as a therapist often. So I want you to bring to mind the student that poses the biggest challenge to you as a teacher. And if you're a parent, your child that needs the most support in your family. Just bring them to mind and think about what are their most present pressing needs right now. What are the things that they struggle with so much day after day, and you're struggling maybe to support them with these challenges. And then I want you to think, kind of zoom out a little bit. If when you were a child, if you were presenting with those same needs as that child that you've just brought to mind, how would you have needed or wanted the adults around you to support you? I think we sometimes forget when, as adults, it's been such a long time since we were kids, right? But when you look back, you're like, I was once a child, and I'm sure I struggled with different things. Like I can remember different struggles that I had as a child and as a student, and I still remember the teachers. I still remember their names. Still remember exactly how they looked. I still remember the ones that truly um, understood me and provided a lot of support and care and compassion and encouragement. And I also remember the ones that maybe didn't do that. So I just think to myself, when I'm working with a child, how would, if I were presenting with these same challenges and struggles, how would I have wanted people to treat me or to respond to me? And then to also reflect on what could this child's communication be communicating? Because as we know, all behavior is communication. A child doesn't just behave in a way because they just feel like it or because it's just how they are as a person, right? Behavior isn't their personality. It's a component of it. But usually when we're acting in a certain way, even as adults, our behavior is communication and we're trying to elicit something from those around us. So there are three types of ADHD, and I like to kind of get to the basics first before I get into all the different aspects of ADHD because the three types aren't very well known. So there's three types that a child can be diagnosed with. The predominantly inattentive presentation. So usually in a diagnosis, it'll say ADHD, primarily inattentive. So these are the children that they seem very calm and regulated. Like they're the kids that can sit at their desk for hours. There's no problem there, but their minds are elsewhere. Like you're teaching them and you're talking to them, and they're not really present. They're somewhere else, kind of mentally. Then there's the predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation, which is most commonly the one that's caught, right? Because it's so obvious. The child that's running around, getting out of their seat, bumping into people, can't sit still. It looks like their motor is always on. I'm sure we can all think of children we know who present that way, or maybe we were like that as kids. So that's one type. And then there's the combined presentation where children have both. They're inattentive, so they have difficulties with their attention and a hard time with their impulsivity and hyperactivity. And just before I go on to the next one, girls, when you look at the research, so males are most commonly diagnosed with ADHD, but there's also a good percentage of girls. They are usually though diagnosed later in life because they kind of slip under the radar because most of them get diagnosed with the inattentive presentation. So they're very quiet, they're very calm, they're sitting in class, looks like they're okay. They're like the ideal student, right? That they're able to sit still and they're not disruptive. But then this student could be really struggling to do her work and her mind is elsewhere, and people describe her as being a daydreamer or she's a kind of in her own little world, and it gets missed that this could actually be ADHD and that she's really struggling with her attention and how to then combine what she's just learned in the lesson, which she wasn't really aware of that it was happening, and for her to then do her work can be very challenging. So even for females, they're usually diagnosed later in life, like 30s even, where they discover that, oh yeah, that's why I was having such a hard time in school. So just as a little note, that girls can definitely be diagnosed with ADHD, but most of the time it's usually the inattentive type. So I have this little analogy. Well, first I'll start with this other piece here, that sometimes we look at ADHD as children who have a hard time paying attention. So that could be one component of it, but a different way of looking at it is that they're actually paying attention to everything, right? They're having all this input, all this stimulation, and they're having a hard time filtering out what's important and what isn't. Can you imagine going through your day with having so much input coming into your system and not really knowing what to do with it? And I find it really helpful to explain it, because then we can approach them with so much more compassion and understanding that they're not trying to be disruptive. They're not trying to get out of doing their work. They are overwhelmed. There's so much coming at them, and their body and their brain and their nervous system is having a hard time filtering all of that out. So I like to describe to parents and teachers when I do this presentation, the supermarket analogy. So you walk into a supermarket, picture yourself, you have a list of things you need to get, and you walk in, and the moment you walk in, you're bombarded, right, by all this visual stuff. It's very colorful, sale signs, all this new stuff that they're putting all over the shelves. So that's just the visual input. Then there's all the auditory. They're playing music in the store. You can hear someone making announcements. There's a baby crying in the aisle next to you. You hear the beeping of every item on the checkout line. And what happens? We sometimes get a little bit overwhelmed, where we're like, wait, what was I here to do? Now, most people are able to eventually filter all of that out, where you kind of tune it out. Like, you don't even really hear the music anymore. You tune out maybe the baby that's crying, and you're able to go to the aisles that you need, pick what you want, and leave. Children with ADHD, or in adults as well, that process of being able to tune out all that stimuli and focus on what you need to do and prioritize that task of, I'm here to get laundry detergent or whatever it is, becomes increasingly difficult, because all of that input seems important and they don't know which one to tune out and which one to keep. It's very hard. So imagine that there's a child who is going through their day feeling like this all the time. So when they're sitting in class, they're trying to pay attention, but they're also hearing the child that coughed next to them, and the girls that are talking next to them, and oh, that person got a new haircut. Oh, and look, the teacher put up a new poster over there. That's really colorful. And I don't like the way my body feels on this chair. All these thoughts, all these sensations, all these things that they're recognizing in their environment are keeping them from being able to focus on their math lesson or English lesson. It's not because they're not trying to, it's because they're actually working extra hard to try and focus. So I think that's really, really important that we understand that, so that when we might call upon a child in class and they're trying so hard to just tune out everything else, and they're kind of jolted back to reality and they're kind of caught off guard, that we just understand that they are trying their best, and it's really, really hard for them because they have so much going on in their minds. The other way I like to describe it is, in our brains, we have kind of like a traffic controller. So you know how they sometimes put an officer when the traffic lights aren't working that directs traffic? We have kind of in our brain something that controls all of that, so it doesn't all crash, right? It filters things out, like, hey, this is an important thought. This is not important. Put it aside. You don't need that right now. Focus on what you're doing. In children with ADHD, that cop is not there. Right? So what happens is, why sometimes stimulant medication is offered to children, is to wake up that cop, is to put that cop back in their position to help direct traffic, right? So it's that inhibitory function of our brain that can inhibit certain impulses and certain stimuli, so that we can focus on what we need to do and so we can function. So I always just like to put those analogies, because what I'm hoping is, inshallah, when you're working with children or you have your own children with ADHD, that you remember that they are trying very, very hard. And there's a few factors that are stacked against them to be able to actually focus on what they're doing. And lastly, just to remember that there's studies that suggest that children with ADHD present with a 3-year delay in skills in comparison to their peers. So if you're working with a 12-year-old, you can't expect them to do tasks that a neurotypical 12-year-old could do. You have to think, okay, is the task I'm giving them matching their skill level from a developmental point of view, where their brain structures are actually, there's differences in their brain structures, and I'll get to that, the biology of it. So it's sometimes unfair to them, right? That we expect them to do exactly what children in their class are doing when their brain hasn't caught up yet. So this, and we'll get into that inshallah in a little bit. So what else could be going on? There are a lot of conditions and factors that mimic ADHD. So they present in the same way, or they can be happening at the same time as somebody who actually is diagnosed with ADHD, and they're in combination. This child has a lot of things going on at the same time, and it's really important for us to know. Or it could be that these are the primary things that are happening that look like ADHD, but they may not be, right? So that's why it's really important in a diagnosis, which is usually given by a psychiatrist or a pediatrician or a psychologist, that they rule out a lot of these other things, or they're able to identify it really is true ADHD and they're struggling with these other things, so that when we come to do the treatment, if we're just focusing on the ADHD, we're not paying attention to all these other things, the child won't really get better. So we always have to keep in mind what else could be going on. So learning difficulties, and I see this a lot with the kids I get asked to work with, is that after they've been assessed by a psychologist, there's usually some learning disabilities that or difficulties that can present. Difficulties with math, with writing, different things that might be contributing to their inability to sustain their attention. Like, just think of yourself when you're working on a task that seems really, really challenging. Your attention might not be 100% because you're going to end up getting frustrated and feeling maybe a little bit hopeless after a while. You're just going to start looking around and getting up. So there might be something really, really prominent there in terms of their ability to learn. So we always have to check that out. Depression, right? Some kids, teens can be struggling with depression. And when you're depressed, your ability to sustain your attention and function and do your everyday tasks becomes much harder. Anxiety. This is a really important one. And a lot of the kids I work with, anxiety seems to be a very, very have a high comorbidity with ADHD. And it makes sense. If you're struggling to get through your day, you're having all these demands placed on you that you can't keep up with, naturally you're going to start feeling anxious, right? Even going to school in the morning will elicit a lot of anxiety because children with ADHD, and I'll get to this a little bit later, they, for the most part, know that they're struggling in comparison to their peers. They don't need anyone to tell them that. It's very obvious to them sometimes. So then that can elicit a lot of that anxiety and even vulnerability and shame, which we'll get into. So if a child is anxious about something in general in their life, the amygdala, which is the emotion control center in our brain, it perceives a threat. So the amygdala is very, very important in our body and our brain. It tells us when um, there's a threat and we have to respond. We either run away, flight, we either mobilize to fight the thing off, fight, or we freeze, we shut down. So those are kind of the three main responses when our body or our brain perceive a threat. Now you might say, what kind of threat will a child experience when they're at school? They're usually safe. This can be so many things. It could be their friends not talking to them one day. That is perceived as a threat because in their world, that's one of the highest priorities, that social belonging piece. A teacher yelling at them or a parent yelling at them, that's a huge threat to that child. That kind of threatens their connection and their belonging and their sense of safety and security. So the amygdala is going to be firing as if there's a bear attacking them. So their ability to learn in that moment, it gets shut down pretty much, right? When a child is feeling anxious, they're feeling really upset, they're emotionally dysregulated, the learning centers shut off. So actually we shoot ourselves in the foot sometimes when we yell at kids or we're dysregulated ourselves and they pick up on that. We actually won't be able to teach them any skills in that moment, right? Or even try to rationalize with them. So if a child is doing something wrong and we reprimand them harshly, I've just kind of shut down any potential for me to teach that child anything because now they're feeling scared. And when they're scared, amygdala's firing, learning centers shut down, even the language centers shut down. So they have a harder time speaking and a harder time understanding our language even. And it's just a bad situation overall. So they might be feeling anxious about something and that can really affect their attention. And I'll just kind of give a little analogy. Imagine today you signed on to this webinar and you were feeling really anxious about something. Let's say the principal at the school you work with emailed you right before and said, we need to talk tomorrow. You're probably going to start feeling a little anxious, right? Because you're like, oh, what's going on? Why do they need to meet with me? And I bet you're probably going to be thinking about that a lot more than anything I'm saying in this talk, which I understand. No judgment, because that's so much more important to you and your sense of safety and survival. So we just have to think of that. Is this child feeling anxious about something? And that's what's making them have a hard time with their attention and regulating. Their physical health, right? I always ask parents to get blood work done. If a child has any thyroid issues or low iron or they're deficient, that can usually indicate a lot of difficulties with regulation and attention. So that's always worth exploring. Stress. Stress, again, kind of fits in with anxiety. When you're stressed about something, it's a lot harder to learn. It's a lot harder to stay regulated. It might just take one more thing to push you kind of completely over the edge. Some kids are stressed about their grades, right? I work with a lot of kids who tell me, if I don't get an A, I'll be in so much trouble at home. Like my parents won't approve of me, or I'll get grounded, and I understand from a parent's point of view, you want your children to do well, but sometimes we actually put them in a worse position to do well when we stress them out about their grades. If that makes sense. So if my child, I've told them, your grades are the be all end all, you better get over a 90% in everything that you do. All I've done is increase their stress and anxiety. So when they come to do their exams or their assignments, all they're thinking of is my voice in their head saying, you better do well. And that actually inhibits their performance. Like we sometimes think that that'll motivate them. It might motivate them to study hard, but when it comes time to do an exam or a test, it's very hard to actually, even if you know the knowledge, it's hard to actually put it down onto paper when you're really stressed and anxious. So just to be aware of that as well. Trauma. Trauma can significantly impact our ability to pay attention and to do tasks and to function in our everyday life. It's just, it's one of the first things I ask about when I work with a child who has ADHD or any kind of emotional dysregulation. Have they had a traumatic incident in their life? Because then if I'm just treating the ADHD and not looking at the trauma, I'm actually not treating the whole child. And even if we work on the attention and the regulation, there's a whole part of their system and trauma isn't just in their brain, it's in their body. Trauma gets stored in the body. So I have to make sure that I'm addressing the entire child and all of their needs. So we always have to make sure we know, have they been through something traumatic? Sleep issues. So this should have been like a quiz question at the end. The number one thing, the very first thing I ask parents when they come to see me is, how is their sleep? Because sleep is the foundation. It's the absolute foundation of everything that we're doing for learning, emotional regulation, impulse control, decision making, problem solving, everything. Everything really hinges on sleep. And I've worked with too many children who weren't sleeping anywhere near the amount of hours that they were supposed to have. And it's never a judgmental thing. It's more of just raising awareness that kids should not be sleeping at 11 or 12, right? That's not what their brains need. And I know every child is different. Some children need a lot more sleep than others. Some children are good with 8 hours and they're good to go, but those are more of the exception. Children typically in those elementary school years, they need between 10 to 11 hours of sleep in general. So if your child has to wake up at 7 in the morning to get ready for school and they're not sleeping till 10 or 11, we've robbed them of sleep that is so essential to their ability to function the next day. And they found like really significant performance gaps in just 1 hour of lost sleep. So if my child has to wake up at 7, they need to be asleep, like full out. They've done their bedtime routine, lights are out by 9, right? And that's even pushing it a little bit. But if we don't start the bedtime routine till 9 and they're not sleeping till 10:30 or 11 and they're waking up at 7, that's a problem. Like I always say, if you have to wake up a child for school and they're feeling exhausted and groggy, that tells you for sure they didn't get enough sleep. So the first thing we work on is sleep. And I usually find, I kid you not, everything falls into place after sleep gets improved, most things, but everything else starts to gradually improve, or at least slightly improve when sleep has been worked on. The child is getting good quality sleep. They have a good calming bedtime routine. They're not like on their screen right before going to sleep and then turning it off and going to sleep. That I really find it's so important. We can't miss the impact of sleep. Bullying, right? That ties into stress and anxiety and even trauma. If a child is being bullied and they're sitting in class knowing that at recess they're probably going to get bullied again, I guarantee they're not going to be listening very, very well, because that's again a huge threat to their brain. Their amygdala will put everything else aside and just keep that threat in their mind. It's an amazing system we have, right? It's a defense mechanism that our brain has to keep us safe. It keeps the threat front and center in your mind. Otherwise, we might walk around not really aware of the threats that we have, or just dismiss them or say it's not important. But the amygdala is really, really key here, because it's telling this child there's something that's really, really unpleasant or dangerous or threatening to you that's coming your way. Don't stop thinking about this, because you have to make sure you're prepared. You have to think of a plan. You have to think about what you're going to do. So believe me, they're probably not going to be focusing very much in class as a result, which is why we really have to make sure if there are any bullying or dynamic issues that we work on them in the class. That's super key. Abuse at home can be a significant factor, right? If a child is in an unhealthy home environment, that's going to come with them to school, right? That could be trauma, that could be stress and anxiety. Like all of these are related. So we just have to be really careful and identify those signs and work with the family to try and to make sure that they're receiving the support they need and that this child is safe. So that ties into the next one, distressing home environment. Are family members fighting all the time, right? Like, is this child, again, it's no judgment. It's just the reality that life is stressful. Marriages can be stressful, and our children sometimes bear the brunt of that. And they come to school having heard their parents fighting, right, that morning, or there's some big, huge family drama that's happening. And as much as us parents, we try to keep our kids away from that, our children they're very, very bright, mashallah. They can pick up on things. They can pick up on parents' stress. I work with a lot of kids like individually where their parents aren't there, and they tell me things sometimes. They're like, we know our parents are very stressed, so we don't want to add to their stress. We don't want to add to their challenges that they're having. So that's why I don't tell my parents what I'm going through. And that's I know that might seem very thoughtful, that the child is really picking up that my parents are really stressed. I don't want to tell them about my issues, but then that leaves the child feeling very alone at home and disconnected. So we just have to be mindful of that we as parents handle our own stress and frustration in a way that we can show that to our kids that we're stressed, but we can actually model to them how to effectively cope with stress. It's a great opportunity, but that we don't make them feel the brunt of it, that they're now carrying that into their school environment. And then lastly, community and world events. There's been no shortage of horrific things happening in our world. And we've been all struggling with it as adults. So I can't imagine a child who doesn't have the ability to process and cope with what's happening. And all they're getting is bits and pieces of information. So they're trying to piece all of that together, and it's very distressing for them. So that could be also coming with them to school. So common challenges. And the reason I did the slide before is just, like I said, so that we make sure we're tending to all of the needs that might be present in the child. There's a lot of comorbidities with ADHD, a lot of them. Like I said, there's a lot of mental health ones that can accompany it. So we just have to be mindful of that. So there's a lot of challenges that children with ADHD can present with, right? Some of them will have more of these than others. Some of them won't have, like we'll have one, but not the other. So this isn't an exhaustive list, but it's just for us to be aware of. When I work with a child with ADHD, I have them in my class, or one of my children has ADHD, I have to understand that these things may be very difficult for them and to support them with those things. So emotional regulation, their ability to handle stressful things and handle things that are beyond their ability to do. Regulating themselves in their friendships, in their classrooms, at home can become very difficult for them. And we'll get to why that is. Impulse control, especially that impulsive hyperactive subtype of ADHD. Those are the children that are blurting things out in class. At home, they interrupt you when you're talking. It's hard for them to wait their turn. They're kind of taking things from people without asking, jumping the line, leaving class, doing all kinds of impulsive things. And again, a lot of that is not always within their direct control, the impulse control, right? It's like their brain, that part of it that inhibits, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. It's not working as great. So we just have to remind ourselves of that. It's harder for them to think about consequences before they act. Attention obviously is a challenge for many of children with ADHD. Learning needs, like we said, social difficulties. These are the children who it's very hard for them to make friends and to keep friends, right? For the reasons that a lot of the reasons that we described, right? It's hard for them to regulate. Like if things don't go their way when they're playing, these are the kids that start yelling or screaming or pushing or walk away. And then their peers are like what do we do now? Like it just becomes really hard for them to sustain those relationships. Not all of them. Some of them are very, very socially adept, and they have no concerns. They're like the social butterfly in the class, and everybody loves being around them. But some children with ADHD really do struggle with their friendships, organization, time management. That conceptualization of time can be really difficult for children in general, especially children with ADHD. Like telling a child you have 10 minutes to finish this, that can mean absolutely nothing to them. Like, what is 10 minutes? Like, how do you quantify that? And we're going to talk about some strategies to help with that. So that's why you might get to the end of the 10 minutes and all they've done is written their name. And you're like, why, where's the rest of your assignment? Because they just didn't know it's 10 minutes. Like how much time is that? So we just have to be mindful of that. Sleep issues, screen time issues. A lot of the kids I work with, they have a hard time with screen time addictions. And that has largely to do with their dopamine, right? That reward chemical, that motivation chemical or neurotransmitter that we have in our brains. It's highly impacted in children with ADHD. So they sometimes have to seek more of it. And obviously, our screens are the biggest dopamine dose that we can get. But the more a child gets used to getting their dopamine from screens, the less they'll be able to actually get it from other things that are, more like playing outside or talking with their family or anything else that can give them that reward signal. It becomes much harder for them to get it except from a screen. That's why they keep wanting to get it, because nothing will ever compare to the dopamine stimulation you get from watching a movie or a video. Video games are the worst, like they're the top, because they're able to control it. It's very fast. They're seeing the results in real time. It's, yeah, so I'm always just a little bit wary. I'm not saying don't let them play or watch. They can, but it just has to be moderated. And self-esteem. And we'll talk about the self-esteem in a bit. So strengths. I know I talked a lot about difficulties and challenges, but I would be doing a huge disservice to children with ADHD if I didn't speak about their strengths. And they are honestly one of my favorite populations to work with, because they're just, a lot of them, they have so much creativity. Like their imagination is unbelievable. Mashallah, like some of these kids, they'll show me stories that they've written, and I read, and they're like 8, 9 year olds, and I look at these stories and I'm like, oh my goodness, I would have never been able to put this together. They have a very rich, very rich imagination, very creative. They're able to see the world differently, which I always say is exactly what we need in our world today. If we are all looking at things the same, we all have the same view, we're all, in terms of the neurotypical world, how this world is set up for neurotypical people, not people who are neurodivergent, but children who are able to see the world differently. I honestly say that we need them. We need people to look at things differently, focus on different things. In an organization, you'll find that you'll have the people who are neurodivergent, who do have ADHD, and they bring to the table something very unique. And a lot of activists you'll find even might have ADHD because they're able to hyper focus on something, right? Even a lot of the world, like the athletes or the greatest thinkers in history, when you just search like greatest people in history who have had ADHD, and you'll get a really big list because of their ability to focus on one thing of interest, right? It depends on their interest. If they're interested in something and motivated, they will leave everything else and they will hyper focus on it. And that can be a huge strength to them. High energy, they do really well in careers where you need a lot of energy. And a lot of research is showing that the people around them would describe them to be more resilient because they're working so hard to overcome obstacles and challenges in their everyday life, right? Just remember, the child with ADHD, it's not that they're not working hard enough, they're working harder than everyone else because everything's so much harder for them. So those are kind of the strengths that I just wanted to point out there. All right. So we talked about challenges, and I think the slides, I may have not updated them, but I had one of the bullet points was going to be executive functioning. So what is this big fancy term? Actually, a lot of experts call ADHD an executive functioning disorder. So executive functioning skills are a group of skills or mental processes in our prefrontal cortex. So this area right here that's extremely essential to to us as humans that allows us to self-regulate and engage in goal-directed behavior. Without all of these skills working well, it becomes very hard to get through your day. And as I explain them, just imagine if you didn't have one of these, how much harder it would be to get up in the morning, get to work, do the things and the tasks that were asked of you to complete, deal with stress, keep up with everything on your to-do list. It would become almost impossible if we didn't have these skills. So the prefrontal cortex, I'm going to get to that in our little biology slide that I have, because in children with ADHD, that part of the brain that has all these skills that regulates them is very much impacted. So response inhibition. And as I'm going through these, I want you to just think about the kids that struggle in your life, that these are the skills that are leading them to struggle in their life. It's not that they don't want to do well. It's not that they don't want to listen. It's that there are skills that they need to be taught. There is a lagging skill here. That's the issue. It's not that they don't want to. It's that it's like giving somebody I don't know, like a computer and saying, okay, I want to take it apart and fix it and put it all together. And it's somebody that's never worked with a computer before. It's just like, I have no idea where to start. I have no idea what to do. So it's giving them a task that matches their skill level. And if they don't have one of these skills that task needs, that task, we have to know how challenging that'll be for them. So just think about that as I'm going through them. So response inhibition, that's your capacity to think before you act, right? Resisting the urge to do something without evaluating it. Working memory, that's our ability to hold information in our brain. So when someone gives you a phone number, you're able to usually hold that for a little bit before you forget it, right? That's that short-term working memory. I've just been given information that I need to do something with. And with children with ADHD, it's very, very difficult. Most of the kids I worked with have a very, very significant working memory difficulty. And this is why sometimes parents will tell me, I give my child instructions and it boggles my mind that they just don't do what I'm asking them. And I tell them, okay, how do you give instructions? What do you usually tell them? They'll say, we'll tell them, go upstairs, put on your socks, brush your teeth, and come downstairs. And then we go upstairs and all they've done is sit in their room. And I'm like, you know why that is? It's because they literally forgot the other two things. Like biologically, anatomically, physiologically, all of the things line up to make us understand that they actually did not remember what you said. It's not that they don't want to do it. Maybe they don't, but they actually couldn't remember the other two things. So I always say, try to give them instructions one at a time, or have visual cues in your house where they can remember things, because by the time that child got upstairs, they forgot that they were supposed to put on their socks and brush their teeth. So they just sat in their room playing. And then we go in there and we're like, why didn't you do what I asked you to do? And they're just looking at us blankly, like, what did you ask me to do? And then us parents, we get frustrated, child feels bad situation overall. And it happens in schools too, right? Where a teacher will assign instructions and then the child's forgotten the last two things to do. Just keep that in mind. Emotional control, right? Ability to manage our emotions, sustained attention. So being able to focus your attention on something despite feeling distractible or tired or bored. Like for us, for example, when you're reading a book and you're feeling like this is kind of boring, but I have to read it for work, you're able to overcome that because you have the skill of sustained attention. Like I can still keep my attention, even if this is the most boring book in the universe, I still have to read this. I'm just going to get through it. Task initiation. So being able to begin a project without really procrastinating in a timely manner. And that's sometimes very hard for them to do, because when we give them a task, like, okay, class, I want you to read 2 chapters of this book and write a paragraph summarizing them, just for example. I don't know if they do that anymore in school. We used to have to do that. And this child is looking at the book. Okay, I'm trying to read these pages. It's very hard for me to sustain my attention. And now I have to summarize this. Initiating that can become so overwhelming because it looks like this huge daunting task they have no idea how to do. So that's where and I'll get into specifics, but that's where we really break it up for them. Planning and prioritization. So the ability to create and maintain a system to keep track of your emotion and your materials. That's organization. Planning and prioritization, your ability to create a roadmap to reach a goal, and prioritizing which tasks you have to do first. We do that every day. A lot of the time, a lot of us adults, we are constantly prioritizing, right? Imagine if you didn't know how to do that well. how much everything in your life would just kind of crash and crumble because you haven't done the things that you absolutely have to do. And instead you do the things that aren't really important. You, you benefit from doing them, but they could have been put aside for a while. Time management, ability to estimate how much time you have left or how much time a task will take. So tests are very hard for children with ADHD sometimes because they might not finish them in time. They might have no idea how much time is left, right? But there's certain things we can do in the classroom to help with that. Goal-directed persistence. So your ability to have a goal, follow through with it until completion, even if there's other things that come up, right? That's extremely important for their schoolwork. Flexibility, right? When something changes in their day, their ability to cope with that. Is very important. Otherwise, they won't be able to regulate their emotions. Becomes this whole cycle where they really struggle in their day. And lastly, metacognition, your ability to stand back and take like a bird's eye view of yourself and how you're doing and the information you're learning. It includes a lot of self-monitoring, self-evaluation. And we even as adults sometimes struggle with that. Sometimes you need someone to come to you and say, hey, like maybe that wasn't the best thing that you did there. So it's like kind of zooming out and looking at a situation and looking at yourself. So those are the main, there's a lot more, but these are kind of the main executive functioning skills. And I could do probably a whole series just on these skills and how we can teach them to kids, but we'll be here till tomorrow. So that'll be another time, inshallah. So with executive functioning, it really, really helps after we just went through all of those. And you can Google them, like if you don't remember them, or we will send the slides, inshallah. But in the meantime, if you want to do this with your child, I really recommend sitting down with these skills, sitting down with your child or the student that's struggling, and going over these with them and asking and exploring with them which of these is really hard for them. They might be doing really well in some of them, like it's a strength for them, like they're very organized. Okay, great. We use that skill, we use that strength to help build the other skills, right? If you're really organized, we can help you with initiating tasks and prioritizing. So we basically use the strengths to help us with the weaker skills. We always start by altering the external before working on the internal. So are there things that we can adapt in their environment to help them be more successful and work on these skills before we actually start changing things in the child themselves. So and I'll get into these for sure. So I'm just trying to see. Yeah. So for example, like a child that gets really easily distracted, before working on their sustained attention skill, making sure they're in an environment that has less visual distractions, right? So we're trying to set them up for success. When giving a task to a child, we determine if it presents, is this a poor match between the task and the child's skill level? If it's a poor match, then we need to reevaluate, break it down, make it simpler, make it shorter so that it matches your skill level. Sorry. So for example, clean your room. How many people go tell their kids, clean your room? It's kind of this thing that we do, right? We just go tell our kids, go clean your room, or in the classroom, we say, clean out your desk. And that can be so confusing for a child. When you look at this task of cleaning your room, there are so many things that go into that. There's clothes that need to be put away, papers that need to be recycled, litter stuff that's just needs to be put in the trash can, organizing, initiating, prioritizing, planning, so many skills. So clean your room becomes this whole debacle where the child's like, I have no idea where to start. So instead of saying clean your room, you give them specific things. You say, okay, go remove all the clothes from the floor and put them in the hamper. And then go through all the papers and see which ones you absolutely need and the ones that you don't, and put them in the recycling bin. So you give them specific steps on how to do this huge task of cleaning their room. You break it up. And we do that same thing at school. There's a big task, we break it up into chunks so that we're setting them up for success. So I kind of talked a little bit about this. How do we help our children develop their executive functioning skills? And again, this is just scratching the surface. Just for the sake of time, we do try and change the physical environment first or the social environment. Like if our child has a hard time regulating their emotions in big crowds, maybe we don't take them to places that are really, really crowded. Or if we're having a play date, we only invite one or two friends instead of like a whole big gathering. change the nature of the tasks your child is expected to perform. So can we make the task shorter? Can we make it more fill in the blank versus having to write out full sentences and paragraphs? Can we build in a little bit of choice for them where they get to choose what kind of task they do? Number 3 here, change the way you interact with the child. So rehearsing with them, like before you go somewhere. Let's say they really struggle with their impulse control, having a like kind of a planning session before you go somewhere. Okay, I know you really struggle to not interrupt people when they talk, so let's rehearse this. Let's do some role playing so that you can have a better ability to control that impulse. Um, so just different ways that we can interact with the child, and then interacting with your child during an activity. Instead of, kind of saying like, I've told you 100 times to do this, which I know we all fall into that. Because all that does is just increase their sense of shame. Just reminding them to check if they have a list. Okay, go back to your checklist. Did you do everything that you were supposed to do? Or, we talked this morning about how we're going to handle these situations. Do you remember what we talked about? Cueing them that way. So some teacher considerations. As a teacher, I always say you have one of the hardest jobs in the world because you have all these kids in your class that might learn differently, that might just need a completely like different approaches, and you're trying to cater to everyone, and that can be really, really hard. So even when I go visit schools, I'm always very mindful that when I'm giving strategies that I'm not overwhelming a teacher who's already overwhelmed with trying to manage everybody's needs, managing disruptive behavior in the classroom. So you really want to support this child with ADHD, but they keep getting up, they keep interrupting the lesson. You understand, right now we have this framework. We understand that sometimes it's beyond their conscious control in that moment, and they need to get up and they need to move, and they're not able to focus. Maybe they had a really hard morning at home and they're feeling anxious and fidgety. And you're like, what do I do in the moment? And that's an excellent question, because you have 25 other kids that need your attention and to teach the lesson, and you have this one child who's really struggling. So that's where, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but building in that proactive approach that we sit with the child, right? We have that one-on-one, which I know takes a bit of time up front. I know it's time that we don't usually have, but you're putting in a little bit of time up front to save you a lot of time down the road. And I love bringing in the child. I love telling them, I know you're a good kid. I know you don't mean to disrupt the class. And I know that you're doing this because there's something inside of your body that's propelling you to do this. And we have a classroom where we need to get through the lesson. So when you need a movement break, let's come up with a way for you to tell me that in a way that isn't disruptive, right? Some kids will put a post-it on their desk, and then their teacher will look at it, nod at them, and they're able to go out in the hallway, do some wall push-ups, go get a drink. It's not disruptive anymore, and the child is getting what they need. And now they feel heard and they're validated, and the communication is a lot better between the teacher and the student. Understanding, yeah, like I said, each student's needs. I highly recommend doing like a student profile. It's something that's usually done at the beginning of the year, where I ask teachers like to send out something to the parents and have the parents fill out like, this is who my child is. This is what works best for them. This is what doesn't work well at all for them. And you build that profile for this child. So now when they're in your classroom, you've already developed a set of strategies that will work for them. And then the last thing is teacher burnout. It's a hard job. It's very hard. You're working your heart out all day. And then when you have children that struggle, it just makes it that much harder. So I always say, and I know this sounds super cliche, but we have to do things as teachers, as educators, as therapists, as parents, people who are so involved in the lives of these children, that we are not coming to them from a completely depleted place where we have no more capacity to pour into anyone else because we're so depleted, right? And I say it's essential that we have processes in place to help us rejuvenate from our very stressful lives. And I'm not going to say suggestions, because for each of us that'll look very different. For me, it's walking. I walk every day, every single day. It's a priority for me. I walk so that I filled my cup and then I can pour into everyone else. All the kids I'm seeing that day, my own children, my family, all the teachers I'm working with, everybody that I'm seeing that day, they are getting a much better version of me when I've done something for myself in the morning. getting good sleep. I struggle with this, so I'm not one to talk, but making sure that we're getting enough sleep. Although I know that time of the night when everyone's asleep and we just belong to ourselves, right? Nobody's asking us to do anything. We want to stay up till 12 or 1 watching things or doing things or just staring into space because we're so overwhelmed from the day we had. But then we wake up the next day and remember how important sleep is for our ability to rejuvenate and cope. So the next day, we're a lot less likely to be able to cope with things that come up in our day. So just things to keep in mind that you, as an educator and as a parent, you also deserve to have your needs met because you're a human being, because that's you're important too. And because also you're a lot less likely to be able to support the children in your life if you haven't done those things for yourself. And then parents, I get a lot of questions from parents. How do we start? We think our child has something going on with them. Where do we go? What do we do? So I always recommend getting an assessment done. So usually psychologists, psychiatrists, and pediatricians are the ones that do assessments. So they might give you like a questionnaire to fill out and something for the school to fill out. Always recommend that they rule out some of those other things that we talked about earlier, that they might be contributing to the inattention or hyperactivity. So we just have to be wary of that. Getting an assessment, getting a report, getting recommendations, sitting down with your child's teacher, and working out a plan because everybody has to be on board. We could be doing amazing work in the clinic, but then school or home isn't following along with that, right? So we need everybody on board. And parents, I always say they're the invisible classmate. So parents have to be, I always, when I work with kids with ADHD, actually, a lot of my work is directly with the parents. I work with the child, but a lot of it's actually with the parents and their approach and how they can respond to their child and support them. For parents that have multiple kids at home, so hard to cater to all the different needs and understand what everybody needs. And then if you give one child a little bit of extra support, the other ones are like, hey, what about me? Why are you allowing them to do that? So you have to manage all of that. As a parent, you are doing so much every day, and parenting has truly become harder in this day and age. I know a lot of things have been made a lot easier for us and convenience wise, but there's so many things that are harder. We don't have this concept of a village. We don't have this concept of just letting our kids play outside for hours. Like when I was a kid, I was I was outside all evening. Like my mom didn't have to sit there and parent me all evening. I was just outside, rain or shine, snowing, freezing temperatures. I'd come home, put my stuff down, have a snack, go out. I would just have to be back before it got dark, like and have dinner with the family, and then that's it. And I can't do that with my kids. Given it's just there's so many factors associated with that, and they're young. But I just feel like we're not living in that village type of society or community where everyone's looking after everyone's kids. Your kids could go to anyone's house, any of the neighbors. It's safe. You're not having to, as a parent your kids 24 hours a day, or the 16 hours a day, or the 8 hours, or even less than that when they're at school all day. But those like 4 or 5 hours, because you've had a long day too, can be very challenging. So just to give yourself a lot of that self-compassion that parenting is hard because it is hard. It's hard all around. So to make sure you tend to your own needs as a parent, and just the stressful, fast-paced lifestyle we have. I always recommend to parents that we sometimes need to reevaluate. Is our lifestyle and our household not conducive to to our children having a healthy state of well-being? If we are always stressed, we are always running around, we are going from one activity to the other, they finish school, they go straight to one activity, and we're only seeing our kids in the car. The only time when we're together is when we're in the car and we're barely listening to each other. That's a problem, right? That kind of lifestyle actually serves nobody. It might seem like it's good because our kids are busy doing healthy things, but I always say we need to balance that. Kids need time at home to unwind, to be doing nothing, to be bored, to have time with their parents, just sit and talk, play a board game. That is, you are just boosting their ability to handle life stressors. You are boosting their mental health, their well-being by doing that versus them going from one thing to the next after school and having no downtime. It's a recipe for disaster. I'll just tell you that. I've had a number of families who everyone's stressed, parents are stressed, kids are stressed, and just that concept of hurry up it does create a lot of anxiety in kids and can lead to anxiety disorders. Like that's one of the common causes of anxiety, always being rushed, right? Even as an adult, I feel like when I'm constantly rushed, I don't feel so great. So just keep that in mind. Do we have to sit as a family, look at our lifestyle, drop a few activities, just have some time at home where we can all breathe? Believe me, the whole family will feel better. And I've experienced this too. I can't tell you how the amount of relief we have now that we have at least 3 or 4 nights a week where we have nowhere to be. We're all together at home. Everybody's just developed this calming ritual. We all wind down, spend time as a family, spend time individually doing our own thing. It's it's a lot better. Let me just say that. And the communication style. So parent coaching is actually one of the most effective interventions for children with ADHD. So again, framework stuff here, right? So children do well if they can. I love this quote because it helps us see it, our children and their students from a completely different lens. There have been children who have ADHD and have other conditions who I've sat with and they tell me, I wish I could be the good kid in the class. I wish I could be like so and so, right? That they're constantly compared to. I wish that I didn't struggle as much. Like these are things that they've actually verbalized to me. I wish that my teachers liked me. Um, I had a child the other day, an 11-year-old boy. I asked him at the end of the session, I said, did you want me to share anything with your parents? Something you'd like me to communicate to them? He said, yeah, can you ask them to just come and ask me what I'm up to? He's like, I just wish they would come to me and ask me, what are you working on? What are you building? Because he's like, the only time I hear from them is when I'm doing something wrong. And I just want them to see when I'm doing something right. So, and I know that's a bit heartbreaking, and it made me very emotional when he said that. And when I told his parents that, they became very emotional, and I told them, listen, like, let's get some self-compassion in there. We're all trying our best. Sometimes we do need to hear these things from our kids so that it helps us. Again, it's that shift, it's that reset. It's like, oh gosh, are we doing the right thing here? So just to keep that in mind, I always say it's not a matter of will, it's a matter of skill. When they're not able to do something, really have to look at what skill does my child need to learn in order for them to do this thing. It's not because they just don't want to, it's because they can't. Brain development, which I'll get into in the next slide. And sorry, I know we're almost out of time, so I'll try to speed it up. Not all children learn or show their skills in the same manner. Sometimes fidgeting or moving around or playing with something in their hands can actually help their brains work better. So just to not, when you see a child that's playing with something in their hand, yes, it can be disruptive in some cases, but it actually might be the thing that's helping them get enough movement in their system so that the learning centers or attention centers turn on. Go on to the next slide. So this is kind of the biology one. I'll be very quick with this, but the prefrontal cortex, which is where all of those executive functioning skills that I mentioned earlier reside, it's actually smaller. They've found images in children with ADHD. So again, we have a biological underpinning for why they're responding and showing up in the world the way they are. Doesn't mean we don't teach skills, doesn't mean we don't hold them accountable, doesn't mean we don't teach them better ways of being in the world and responding, but we just understand now, okay, that's why that's happening. Learning and attention centers light up when they're allowed to move their body. So they did fMRI scans of children with ADHD. The learning centers, when they're sitting there at their desk, were for the most part off. The attention, the language, the learning. And once they were able to move their bodies, it's amazing when you look at the studies, they are lighting up as soon as they move. How do we implement this in the classroom? These are the kids where I tell the teachers, let them stand at the back of the class, let them hop, let them move around, put on one of those bands on their chair legs and let them kick it while they're sitting down. Moving helps their brains learn better. And then there's the orbitofrontal cortex. It's a mouthful. It regulates our impulse control, our intelligence, our communication. It's affected also in ADHD. So there's, again, brain structures that are actually different for children with ADHD. There's also one other comorbidity that can happen with ADHD, which makes that, you know how I talked about that supermarket analogy, our ability to filter all those sensory information. Children can also have something called sensory processing disorder, or a difficulty with how their brain and nervous system are able to modulate all that input. So it's like the volume is turned up, I say, on all their senses. They hear everything. They hear the pin drop. They see everything. We actually have 8 senses, not just 5, right? So they're getting interoception is the sensations from inside their body, sensations of hunger, of thirst, of needing to go to the bathroom, their emotions, right? Sometimes it's dialed up and sometimes it's dialed down. Proprioception, their body awareness, vestibular sense, their sense of movement, right? So some children might seek more of this input, and some children might seek less, or it becomes dysregulating. So we just have to keep that in mind, that is this child getting so much input to their system that now they don't know what to do anymore. So I just thought I'd mention that, and that could be its whole own talk, inshallah, maybe in the future. Okay, so I'll end with this, inshallah. So a lot of research out there on children with ADHD and its association to shame. Shame is that feeling of, so guilt is I did something bad. Shame is I am bad. It becomes our identity. And a lot of children, and especially the ones I like, even from my own sample size, from the kids I work with, a lot of them have developed a sense of inherent shame that I'm just not good enough, because they're aware enough to know that they struggle with things that not all of their peers struggle with. And they receive, I think it was like 20,000 more negative messages than their peers by the age of 12. Can you imagine that? A child who's received so much more negative input and comments and feedback than their peers, how that's going to affect them, right? And I get it. I know that we are sometimes really stressed as their caregivers to be able to respond always in the right way, but this is just really important for us to know, because shame doesn't lead to good outcomes. I'll just say that. Guilt can. Guilt is actually a healthy emotion. It helps us rectify things. Shame convinces us that I'm just no good and I never will be. So when we give a child warmth and connection proactively, like we don't wait till they're seeking it, we give it to them throughout their day. They feel connected to the people around them. They feel like their teachers like them, their parents love them. They feel a sense of belonging, and like, even if I make a mistake, I'm still loved. And these people are going to help me improve my behavior instead of punish me for it. This doesn't mean we don't discipline. There are definitely a lot of ways that we can discipline in a way that preserves that child's sense of self, keeps them feeling like I'm still a good kid who is struggling, instead of I'm a bad kid. We never want a child to think they're a bad kid. That does not lead to good things. Yeah, like I said, shame can become intertwined into their self identity. And we can teach a child that certain behaviors are unacceptable without making the child themselves feel not accepted. So there's a lot of different treatment options. I'll just mention them quickly. Medication is part of the equation, right? Sometimes. And I know a lot of parents are wary about that. And I get asked a lot, should we give our child medications? Again, this could be a whole other talk. It's usually in combination with a lot of these other things. It's, on its own, I don't think it's the be all end all. I think there has to be a lot more other things that we should try as well. So just to keep that in mind, in school strategies, adapting their environment, the approach of the parents, the teachers that are working with them, family therapy, getting everybody communicating better at home, having a better lifestyle, a home that's conducive to everyone's well-being, teaching the child about themselves, building their self-awareness, how they're struggling, why they're struggling, and how to cope with that. So in the classroom, and again, you'll get all of these slides, right? And I think I talked a little bit about these. We always kind of have that compassionate, curious approach. I wonder why they're not doing their work. I wonder why they're jumping off the walls, right? We go back to that curious compassion instead of the critical labeling of a child. Meet with the child one-on-one to discuss these challenges. And there's a really good book, I have it at the end here, that talks all about how to do this in a really good way. Movement, giving them as much movement as possible. Outdoor time is essential. We never take away recess or gym from a child, ever. Ever, like, as a consequence for their behavior, because you're just shooting yourself in the foot again. You're just taking the one thing that can actually help them regulate and giving them a timeout. They're not learning any skills by sitting on the bench. They have learned 0 skills from that. Instead, we say, why did they do that? And what skill do we need to teach them to enable them to not do that behavior again and to respond better? Where they sit in the classroom. I'm always surprised when I see children with ADHD sitting in the back. I'm like, now you've just given them so much more visual and auditory input that's distracting them. Put them right up at the front, on the side, so they only have one person next to them, close to the teacher. That's usually the best position that I find for children with ADHD, so that the board is the first thing that they're seeing. Feeling connected to the teacher, feeling like their teacher likes them, right? A routine, right? A planner, something that helps them, and we support them in how to use that planner, because chances are they might forget to write what they have to do. Modifying classwork. So instead of doing 4 pages, we give them 2, right? Just modifying it as much as we can. We're still assessing their learning, but we don't have to tire them out in the process to do that. And then supporting them at home will look similar in certain ways. Sleep, again, nutrition, protein is huge. Again, I can do a whole talk on nutrition. Protein is essential for children with ADHD, for all kids, for all of us adults too. It's a thing that really helps us regulate our emotions. So definitely need protein in the morning, pack it in their lunch, give it to them at supper. Reducing shame and comparisons, not telling them, why can't you be like your brother or your sister? That really doesn't do good things for them or their relationship with their siblings. Giving them simple instructions. Remember, they can't hold too many instructions at once. Movement, giving them a lot of time to move, winding down, that downtime where they can just be. They don't have to be anywhere or rush anywhere. Connection time, having a little bit of that one-on-one time with them every day where they feel that belonging and acceptance and love. It really does wonders for children. And again, that emotional thermostat of the home. What is the home like? Different forms of support, helping the child understand their own system and how it works, helping them label their feelings into words, right? Turns on that prefrontal cortex, giving them a lot of time for play and creative expression. Like I said, punishment doesn't teach skills. Like telling a child go sit in your room doesn't teach skills. It just doesn't. I'm not saying we don't discipline, but discipline has to be involved with teaching skills. Helping a child regulate, right? A lot of these kids are the ones that kind of sometimes have these outbursts. So the less words we use in that moment, the better. This isn't the time to teach them when they're dysregulated. Literally, they're not hearing us. It's like we're speaking a different language to them in that moment. So instead of sitting there and rationalizing with them, logically trying to get them out of that situation, it won't work. The emotions are in their body, they're coming out, they have to come out. We have to be that safe container for those emotions. We have to be okay with these emotions sometimes. And we teach them how to cope better. How do we do that? In the debrief. After they've had these outbursts, we have to sit with them and we have to kind of narrate it like a story. Like this happened and then that happened. And then you had a really hard time with your feelings. Next time this happens, how could we cope better? And we do that when they're calm, when their ability to learn is actually on, not when they're dysregulated. Having proactive strategies to reduce potential for dysregulation. If I know my child really gets dysregulated at the end of watching TV, we have to think of a strategy for that. We have to agree on something beforehand. We have to maybe connect a little bit with them before we tell them to turn it off. As the parent, I have to set the boundaries. So I might just have to be okay with them having a hard time with their emotions. I'm not going to change my boundaries because they struggle when I turn off the TV. Again, we keep our boundaries firmly, kindly, and we support them through those emotions that they're having. And these are just some really great books. If you're looking for some resources, Lost at School is the book I was referencing earlier, where it helps you as a teacher, as a parent, sit with your child and really come up with some good strategies. Scattered Minds says probably it changed my whole outlook of ADHD. It was the first book I read. Really good book. Smart but Scattered teaches a lot of the executive functioning skills. So yeah, just some books there for your reading. And we are at the end of my presentation. I'm sorry, I wanted to leave more time. I am able to stay on a little bit longer to address some of the questions. So forgive me for going a bit over, but I will take some questions right now, inshallah. Well, Anisa.
Yeah. Jazakallah so much, Sister Runda, for your insightful presentation from an Islamic perspective, and for all of you guys for joining us tonight. We really hope this webinar has provided valuable guidance to all of you, myself included. Included in the Q&A, a lot of the questions came up about, Sister Runda, about how we can foster an environment that encourages children to be accepting and supportive of peers with ADHD in the classroom.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're also thinking about the other kids in the classroom too. So something I also recommend at the beginning of the year, but you can do this at any time, is we present to children that We all have different brains that work differently. And we sometimes talk about all of our different quirks, right? I tell the kids I work with, I have a specific way that I like to sleep. I have to have a pillow here and a pillow there. That's just a sensory quirk for me. And then we go around the classroom where we share some of these things, right? And it helps build that compassion and that empathy, and that it's okay for us to be different. Different isn't bad. Different can be really beautiful, and that our brains all work differently. And I have a really nice passage that I've had teachers like print and put in their classroom that talks exactly about that. I'm paraphrasing now, but it's basically like there are 24 kids in this room, 24 different brains, 24 different households that they come from, 24 different life experiences. So of course we're going to be different. And we all have to look at each other with the eye of compassion and mercy. And we explain that. I just find that fosters a bit of a better dynamic and understanding.
Inshallah, Jazakallah for that. The other question that keeps coming up is addressing speaking to parents about their child.
In terms of like a teacher letting the parents know that your child might be struggling with certain things.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that can be hard. It can definitely be hard. Usually I'm put in the middle of those situations as a therapist, but alhamdulillah, it's all of it comes down to approach, really. And parents at the end of the day want what's best for their child. It's hard for them to hear your child is really struggling. No parent wants to hear that, but the approach that I take is we actually want to set your child up for success. So maybe this environment might not be conducive to that, right? Some environments are just not. I always explain it like a plant. If a plant isn't growing, it's not the plant's fault. It's not like we sit there and punish the plant. We just plant it somewhere else. We take it by the window. We take it somewhere else, and it grows and it blossoms and it thrives in a different setting, different environment. Children can be the same way, right? So a lot of it comes down to the approach of we're on the same team, right? Telling the parents like I'm team Yusuf or I'm team Sada. I'm on your kids' team here. I really want to see them succeed. And I'm seeing in the classroom that they're really struggling with X, Y, and Z, and bring specific examples. Bring some of their strengths up too. That always helps. But also just really helping the parents see that I I love your child. I really, really love them and I want them to do well and I want them to succeed. And this is what I'm suggesting. Maybe they need an assessment. It's not a label. It's that if we know that this is what they're struggling with, then we have a much better grasp of their condition and how we can work with it versus us just seeing a child who's struggling to do their work with their behavior, with their peer relationships, and we have no idea what's going on. So that's kind of the approach that I take, and it usually goes fairly well. Sometimes there's emotions, and that's okay. We don't have to prevent emotional reactions. It's normal for a parent to become emotional. Give them time to absorb it. Let it simmer. Let them think about it for a bit. Plan a meeting a week later to talk about things again after they've had some time to absorb it. But really just bringing it from the approach of we're all on the same team here.
Yeah. And finally, there was this question. I'm not sure if it's phrased properly, but they're asking for another webinar with strategies for someone or adult or child with ADHD to overcome the skills they lack in executive functioning.
Inshallah, yeah, I would. I'll discuss with the team, inshallah. And like I said, this was just like a little scratching the surface. There's so much, and I know I bombarded you all with a lot of information, but that can be it can be a series, really. Executive functioning, what it is, how to teach children these skills, in a engaging manner. Like it's not like we sit them down and say, okay, let's learn how to have better attention. There's a lot of different ways we can facilitate that. It's very cool, subhanAllah. There's just a lot of amazing knowledge out there. So I would love to, inshallah, help out with that.
I think that's it for questions and answers. Most of them you answered already, sister.
Okay.
In your yes, we will be sharing the recording for this and a transcript, inshallah. If that's it, on behalf of ISAC and our partners, Ruh Care, Smile Canada, Nasheeha Mental Health, and Muhsen, we thank you all for your time and dedication to this important work. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always keep our community united and collaborative. Assalamu alaikum.
Ameen, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Have a great evening, everyone.
وإياكم. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
أشرقت نفسي بنور من فؤادي حينما رأت